Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 216. Hilton Farlow. Part 2. I'll now continue with Hilton Farlow's arrests and his jail time, as he's not finished yet. On the 18th of April 1928 in the Sydney Labour Daily, wealthy squatter puts over bad checks in Tamworth. The Tamworth Police Court today saw James Hilton Farlow, alias Purcello, alias Parslow, pleading guilty to a charge of uttering valueless cheques for £5 to Savile Rogers, cafe proprietor, and receiving that amount. He represented himself as Joe Taylor, a wealthy squatter, and he was accused of tendering Rogers a cheque of £5 which was cashed. He had no money in the bank on which the cheque was drawn. Records showed that there were convictions in Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales for similar offences. He was sentenced to 2 months in Tamworth Jail and ordered to pay restitution to George Savile Rogers of £5 and, in default, a further term of 2 months with hard labour. On a further charge of failing to pay his hotel expenses of £7, 7 shillings and 6 pence, Farlow was sentenced to 6 weeks imprisonment and ordered to make restitution, in default a further term of 3 months with hard labour, with the sentences to be concurrent. And on the 25th of April 1928, James Hilton Farlow, alias James Parslow, alias Parcello, charged on warrant with refusing to pay the sum of £7, 7 shillings and 6 pence to Thomas Henry Darlington for meals and accommodation, has been arrested by constables Blackman and Boyd by Tamworth and Coringal Police. Sentenced to 6 weeks hard labour and ordered to make restitution for the amount stated, or a default of a further term of 2 months hard labour. Further charged with obtaining a sum of £5, the property of George Savile Rogers, by false representation. Sentenced to 2 months hard labour and ordered to make restitution in the amount stated, in default for a further 2 months hard labour. Identical with offender Hilton James Farlow. So on the 3rd of March 1929, he was charged on 2 counts of false pretences and received 12 months jail. And on the 15th of March 1929 in Newcastle, he was charged with another count of false pretences and received 9 months jail hard labour, which was served concurrently. So all up, it was stated that he got 12 months hard labour and he served that in Maitland Jail. On the 3rd of April 1929, James Farlow, alias Hilton James Farlow, alias Hilton James Cooper, alias Hilton James Thompson, charged with obtaining the sum of £5, the property of Walter Henry King, by false pretences, was arrested by Sergeant Nichols and Constable Carroll of Sydney Police and sentenced to 6 months hard labour. Further charged, the second charge on warrant, with obtaining the sum of £2, 10 shillings and £5, the property of Cis Fennelly and Wallace Lake by similar means. Sentenced to 6 months hard labour and 9 months hard labour respectively, the first sentence accumulative, the second concurrent. Identical with offender Hilton James Cooper. He was released from Maitland Jail on the 15th of January 1930, and on the 20th of February 1930 in Glebe he was charged with not paying a cab fare and was fined £5 and 4 shillings or 14 days hard labour. On the 18th of March 1930 in Sydney he was charged with imposition and he was jailed for 14 days with hard labour. On the 7th of May 1930 in the Broken Hill Barrier Minor. In the police court this morning, Joe Ward, alias James Farlow, aged 46, described as an engineer, and Cullen, alias Arthur Edward Frost, 32, described as a labourer, were charged on the 2nd of May at Broken Hill with stealing one Hudson deluxe motor car valued at £375, the property of Walter Martin. Ward applied for bail. Sergeant Carlin said that he would ask for substantial bail as both men were strangers. The bail was allowed for self at £80 with a surety of the same amount. And on the 7th of May 1930 in the Broken Hill Barrier Minor. Theft of motor car, stolen car abandoned. In the Peterborough Police Court on Tuesday morning, Joe Ward, alias James Farlow, and Arthur Edward Frost, alias Cullen, were charged with the theft of a motor car, the property of Walter Martin, and on application of Constable Sutherland were remanded to Broken Hill in custody. Broken Hill was reached at 10:15 last night. A call was made at Manor Hill on the homeward trip where Mr Martin took possession of his car from the Manor Hill Police. And on the 15th of May 1930 in South Australia in the Port Pirie Recorder. 2 bad records, car thieves imprisoned at Broken Hill. Joe Ward alias James Farlow, aged 46, has a long list of previous convictions against him in Wellington, New Zealand, Brisbane, Orange, Melbourne, Port Pirie and other towns for larceny and false pretences. And Arthur Collins alias Arthur Edward Frost, aged 32, were charged by the Broken Hill Police today with having stolen a motor car. Collins also had previous convictions in practically all states of the Commonwealth. Both accused pled not guilty to the charge of having stolen the car, but guilty in illegally using it. Each was sentenced to imprisonment for 18 months. The evidence showed that after leaving Broken Hill, the car was bogged at Manor Hill. The occupants abandoned it, went to Peterborough on an ore train, and at that time were arrested and brought back to Broken Hill. Both the accused made statements from the dock. Ward said that in this case he was to blame and not the man alongside him. He only was responsible. He drank a lot that day and did not know what he was doing. He took the car against the wishes of the other accused. He asked His Honour to temper justice with mercy, and he pointed out that he had had 4 years' service at the war and he had not intended to steal the car. Collins said he'd done the wrong thing. He was under the impression that he was to get work and drove away in the car. There was no intention of stealing. He'd been to war, and since he returned, he'd been working nearly all the time. His Honour then stated, though, "You've served 2 years in jail." Collins said he had little education and had to battle for himself, and he asked for leniency. His Honour said Ward was taking the blame, but he did not take any notice of that, and the sentence was passed to be served at the Goulburn Jail. On the 20th of August 1930, in the Police Gazette, John Ward, alias Joe Ward, alias James Farlow, alias Hilton James Farlow, alias Hilton James Thompson, alias Hilton James Cooper, 47, has been further charged and brought before the Ningen bench by Sergeant Brown with obtaining the sum of £10, the property of Joseph Goodman Payne, by false pretences, and sentenced to 3 months hard labour. Under the name of Francis Farlow, on the 19th of November 1931, he was charged with being a fraud, a rogue and a vagabond in Mooroopna, Victoria. He received 12 months and 14 days jail. He was released from Pentridge on the 15th of October 1932. On the 28th of January 1933, in the Brisbane Courier, alleged theft of motorcar. In the police court yesterday, Hilton James Farlow, 49, engineer, and Norman Walter Farlan, 41, medical student, and Alexander Gordon Herbert Dawson Robert Shelton, 44, salesman, were charged with stealing a Buick motorcar on the 25th of January, valued at £200. And 2 days later, Hilton James Farlow, 49, engineer, and Robert Shelton, 44, salesman, charged with obtaining jewellery valued at £54 and 13 shillings from Herbert V. Cottrell by means of a valueless cheque, and they were remanded till February the 3rd. Also, Farlow was remanded on the same date on 3 charges of having obtained goods and money at the value of £13, 7 shillings and 6 pence from Alfred Ronald Green by falsely pretending he was a station owner negotiating the purchase of a hotel. And in the Brisbane Courier on the 4th of February 1933, expert shearer, appeal that failed. Hilton James Farlow, 49, engineer, alias Johnston, alias Cooper, was charged that in Brisbane on the 1st of January by falsely pretending to Alfred Ronald Green that he was a station owner and that he was negotiating for the purchase of the Indooroopilly Hotel, he obtained from Green a pair of trousers valued at £1, 12 shillings and 6 pence. On the 12th of January, he obtained from Green a sum of £2 with the intent to defraud. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment with hard labour on each charge. On a charge of having obtained from Green clothing to the value of £9 and 15 shillings, he was sentenced to 2 months' imprisonment with hard labour. Hilton James Farlow and Dawson Robert Shelton were charged that on the 24th of January at Brisbane, they falsely pretended to Dorothy Elizabeth Cottrell that a cheque for £54 and 13 shillings was good and valid. They obtained from Herbert Vincent Cottrell jewellery to the value of £54 and 13 shillings with intent to defraud. They were each sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment with hard labour. On a charge that at Southport on the 25th of January, by falsely pretending to Mavis Haig, an employee at the Pacific Hotel, that a cheque for £10 was good and valid, he obtained a sum of £8 and 10 shillings. Hilton James Farlow was sentenced to 2 months' imprisonment with hard labour, the sentence to be cumulative. In asking that the term should not be made cumulative, Farlow said he was an expert shearer and was expecting to get work. The magistrate said, "You have been an expert in every state of Australia except Western Australia. You have shown your expertness, and I will give you no consideration, not with that record. A year later, on the 21st of February 1934, in the Brisbane Courier Mail, remand on fraud charge. In the police court yesterday, Hilton James Farlow, 49 labourer, was charged at Toowoomba by falsely pretending that he was a part owner of the Basket Plated Shoe Company of South Brisbane, and he obtained £2 from Thomas Arnell with intent to defraud. The defendant, who was on remand from Oakey, was further remanded for 8 days. Bail was refused, the police stating it was probable that there would be other charges. The details of the court case were in the Toowoomba Chronicle and Darling Downs Gazette on the 6th of March 1934. I believe that you are a thorough rascal, and I'm sorry that you have asked me to deal with the case summarily. A sentence of 2 or 3 years by the criminal court might straighten you up. The police magistrate made this observation in the police court yesterday when Hilton James Farlow pled guilty to obtaining £2 from Thomas Arnell, the licensee of the Governor Blackhall Hotel, by false pretences. Evidence was given by Arnell that Farlow came into the hotel and asked for a loan of £2, stating he and his brother owned the Basket Plated Shoe Company in Brisbane and he was engaged in canvassing orders. He expected money from Brisbane, and Arnell handed over the £2, and on February the 10th, Farlow asked him to leave his bill, which with the £2 loan totalled £3.15 until the following Monday. On the Monday, Farlow said he would come back with the money from the bank at 10:30am. He never returned, and when his room was searched, it was found most of his luggage had been removed. George Jenoff, member of the Basket Plated Shoe Company in Brisbane, denied that Farlow or his brother had any interest in the firm. The Farlows had been allowed to sell shoes on a commission basis only in Brisbane, and they'd received £30 worth of shoes for which the company received no money. Farlow pled guilty. Senior Sergeant Wilkinson informed Mr Byrne that Farlow was a swindler with a long criminal record. Among other charges, he'd been convicted on 16 occasions for false pretences. Farlow told Mr Byrne that drink and racing were the causes of his condition. I've had plenty of chances, but they've done no good. The 23rd of January 1935 in the New South Wales Inverell Times. Avoided payment, meals and fares, formidable record. At the Inverell Police Court on Tuesday, Hilton James Cooper was charged with evading payment for meals and accommodation at Armidale and Walcher and taxi fares on 2 occasions in Sydney. The police said the defendant was an old hand and had served 18 months sentence at Broken Hill for allegedly using a car, 12 months at Maribna in Victoria for being a rogue and vagabond, 12 months at Melbourne for 2 charges of false pretences, the sentences being concurrent. Undoubtedly, the defendant was a rogue, as his lengthy list of convictions indicated. These ranged from fines of £3 to sentences of 3 to 6 months on charges of larceny, false pretences and false representations in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, and in the localities mentioned as well as Brisbane, Toowoomba, Gundagai, Wellington, Orange, Tamworth, Burwood, Newcastle, Glebe, Broken Hill, Nyngan, Melbourne, Maribna and Port Pirie. The defendant pled guilty to each charge. He said he did not wish to see a list of previous convictions. He was thoroughly ashamed of the record of himself. He had a good record as a soldier, and every lapse was the result of a drunken carousal. The defendant pled for a chance to rehabilitate himself and be dealt with leniently, as he had a chance of a good job cooking on the cane fields up north this year. On 2 charges of avoiding payment for accommodation, the defendant was sentenced to 3 months imprisonment with hard labour. And on each of the other charges of avoiding taxi fares, the defendant was fined £5 or 10 days, the sentences to be concurrent. And on the 13th of September 1935 in the Sydney Morning Herald, at Golargambone, 6 months imprisonment. Hilton James Farlow, alias H.J. Thompson, alias H.J. Cooper, was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment for obtaining money under false pretences. Farlow, it was stated, obtained £2 from a local storekeeper and disappeared. A warrant was issued for his arrest and he was captured at Liverpool. He had 34 previous convictions of a similar nature in 4 states. In 1944, he married Dorothy Flora Field under the name Hilton James Cooper in Victoria. He was 60 and Dorothy 49. Dorothy was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Frederick James Field of Maryborough and Melbourne, and Hilton, in the newspaper, listed himself as the son of the late Mr. and Mrs. James Cooper of Richmond, New South Wales. Hilton died on the 30th of August 1950 in Queensland, aged 66, under his true birth name. The children that were put into state care were both born in Dubbo. The first was Kenneth Aubrey Farlow, who was born on the 27th of April 1907. At the age of 4, on the 1st of May 1911, Kenneth was committed into state care, and it stated that his father, Hilton James Farlow, had deserted, and his mother, Ethel Maud Farlow, was residing at the Courthouse Hotel at Narromine, and this was then changed to Wellington, New South Wales. He was committed to Mr. Thomas Dowling, and he used the surname of Dowling from that time on. He absconded on the 18th of October 1917 and again on the 15th of March 1918. He was then placed with Thomas Dowling's great aunt at the refreshment rooms, Tamara, at Dubbo in September 1918, but absconded there on the 25th of July 1920. On the 25th of August 1920, he's featured in the Police Gazette. A warrant's been issued by the Children's Court Bench for the arrest of Aubrey Dowling, charged with being an uncontrollable child. 13 years of age, 5'4" or 5 inches high, nuggety build, fair complexion, brown hair, blue eyes, flat nose, long thick eyelashes, dressed in dark tweed trousers, a black and white Guernsey with no coat, a grey overcoat with black stripes through the material, a dark grey tweed cap, and grey knitted golf stockings with black boots. He must have been found as he was then placed with Mrs. MacDonald at Wellington in October 1920 and then back to Miss Dowling in Paddington in June 1921. He was released from state care in September 1921. In 1924 he was tried in the Children's Court for stealing from a dwelling and given 12 months probation. On the 21st of August 1928 in the Daily Telegraph in Sydney, burglary charges. Edward Lester, 24, showman, and Kenneth Aubrey Farlow, 24, basket worker, were committed for trial in the Paddington Police Court in connection with charges of breaking and entering and stealing. They entered the dwelling house of John Buchanan and stole jewellery to the value of £25, which has been recovered. They were then further charged with breaking and entering the dwelling houses of William George Dean, John George White and Walter Clarence Stewart and stealing jewellery to the value of £80, £70 and £9 respectively, partially recovered. Also with breaking and entering the dwelling house of Robert Fenwick Lee and stealing jewellery valued at £180, partly recovered. The property of Robert Fenwick Lee and Monica Bacillus, and Farlow further charged with breaking and entering the dwelling house of Ralph Asher and stealing jewellery to the value of £80, part recovered. Committed for trial on all charges at the Quarter Sessions. Both further charged with breaking and entering the dwelling house of Annie Pickering, Percy Eugene Rowan, Frederick Thomas Wilson, William Alfred Gibson and Muriel Cato, and stealing jewellery and clothing. Farlow further charged with breaking and entering the dwelling houses of Lily Bowden and Jack Gyra and stealing jewellery. And that was on the 29th of August 1928, and it states that all charges were withdrawn. In his New South Wales jail record, he stated he was born on the 27th of April 1904, making himself 3 years older than what he actually was, and he also used aliases like his father. His aliases were Kenneth Austin Farlow and Earl Shaw. On the 11th of March 1929 in the Sydney Morning Herald, while a cricket match was being played on the grounds of the Emu Plains prison on Saturday afternoon, Kenneth Arthur Farlow, 24, and Bruce William Mabry, 20, both prisoners, escaped the institution. Farlow was serving a sentence of 2 years imprisonment for breaking, entering and stealing, and Mabry sentenced to 12 months for illegally using a motor car. Each man had only served a few months of his sentence. The men are stated to have called in at a woman's home and asked for clothes. The woman, suspecting them to be escaped prisoners, refused their request and notified the police. On the 22nd of August 1931, in the Perth Western Australian. In Sydney, on a charge of having shot a Constable James Ulrich with intent to murder him, Kenneth Aubrey Farlow, 27, a wicker worker, and Robert Crystal, 23, a labourer, were committed for trial. Constable Ulrich gave evidence that in response to a report of housebreaking at Vaucluse, he went to Vaucluse on his motorcycle. He stopped Farlow and Crystal and was driving them to the police station in his sidecar when Farlow caught him by the neck and Crystal kicked him. Farlow said, "Get his gun and shoot him." Crystal took Ulrich's pistol and fired at him, striking him in the chest. Crystal and Farlow rode away on his machine. Farlow, when questioned by the police subsequent to the shooting, said, "No use denying it. I held the constable but did not shoot him. I told my mate to take the revolver from the constable. I thought he would stun him with it." And on the 30th of September 1931, the jury returned a verdict of guilty and both prisoners were sentenced to death. Constable Ulrich was seriously wounded with his own revolver. On the 14th of January 1936 in the Hobart Mercury. Prisoner's bold bid, attempt to break jail, dummy revolver used in Sydney. A prisoner in the Parramatta jail, Kenneth Aubrey Farlow, serving a life sentence for having attempted to shoot Constable Ulrich at Vaucluse in July 1930, made an attempt to break out of jail. The prisoners in the jail were placed in their cells and searched. Soon after the night wardsman began, Farlow knocked on his cell door as an indication that something was wrong. A senior warder, accompanied by a sentry, opened the grille leading to the corridor where Farlow's cell was situated, and after handing over his revolver to the sentry, peered through the trapdoor into Farlow's cell. Farlow complained that the system was leaking. As the warder opened the cell door, the prisoner poked what appeared to be a revolver against his forehead. The warder momentarily stepped back, but as Farlow jumped out of the cell, threw the padlock at him. The prisoner raced towards the main gate of the jail, but under the jail regulations, the sentry had relocked the grille door after the warder had entered and was standing ready for any emergency. As Farlow approached the grille door, the sentry fired a shot, and this frightened him. Seeing that he could not get out of the grille, Farlow ran back and was soon overpowered and replaced in his cell. It was later found that the weapon with which he'd threatened the warder was a piece of wood carved to represent a revolver. An inquiry is proceeding to ascertain how the prisoner got possession of a dummy revolver. On the 18th of December 1940 in the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, climbed wall but fell, lifer's story in jail case. Kenneth Farlow, a prisoner serving a life sentence at Maitland Jail, who was called at West Maitland Court yesterday, said he was going to get water for his birds when he saw a shirting hanging from the wall of the jail. He attempted to climb up and was within a few feet of the top of the wall when he slipped and fell. He received a severe shaking. He added he did not see Jones and Burney get over the wall, but saw them on the run to the wall and heard one of them say lively. Farlow was called by the police in the case in which Arthur Mackay, 33, a former warder at the jail, was charged with having on the 7th of November aided and assisted Robert Jones and William Burney, prisoners then confined to Maitland Jail, to escape. In the Sydney Sun on the 3rd of April 1941 is in the newspaper again. Prisoner refuses evidence. At Maitland. I don't want that, said Kenneth Farlow when he was handed the Bible by the court orderly at the Maitland Quarter Sessions today to take an oath as a witness in the case against Arthur Mackay, 34, former warder at Maitland Jail. Mackay is charged with having aided the escape of William Burney and Robert Jones by fastening a rope to the top of the jail wall and also with neglect of duty by failing to keep a good lookout. Farlow also attempted to escape but injured himself and was discovered in a lavatory within the jail by Warder Donovan. Today, Farlow entered the court accompanied by 2 warders. He said, I refuse to give any evidence, waving away the Bible. I have a life sentence to meet in that jail and I know the accused in the dock had nothing to do with it. I refuse to be questioned. Crown prosecutor asked the judge to compel the witness to answer. The judge said, what power have I to compel the witness to be sworn? Mr. Hutchinson was beginning to address the judge when Farlow broke in. Take any steps you like. I'm not going to answer any questions against a man I know to be innocent. After reading the depositions, Judge Neild asked Farlow to be taken from the court and then told Mr. Hutchinson, when a man is serving a life sentence, he is in no position to be sworn to obey the order of the court, and I will take what punishment the court I impose. And that's when the trial goes cold on Kenneth Farlow. I'm assuming that due to his sentence that he died in jail. So interesting how he followed pretty much the same type of misdemeanours and as his father, despite his father deserting him at such a young age. His second son, Albert Austin Farlow, was born on the 28th of February 1909 in Dubbo. He was only 2 years and 2 months old when he was committed into state care on the same day as his brother. He was fostered out to Mrs. Huxley at Dubbo and was known throughout his life as Albert Huxley. He was discharged from care on the 26th of May 1923. Albert, under Albert Huxley, was named in the divorce of Clarice Kathleen May Leard and Charles Herbert Leard in May 1936. In the Sydney Morning Herald on the 1st of May 1936, Leard versus Leard. Charles Herbert Leard and Clarice Kathleen May Leard, formerly Mayberry, marriage September 1930 at Erskineville with Roman Catholic rites. Issue. Adultery with Albert Huxley, who is joined a co-respondent. In the next year, on the 25th of November 1937 in the Sydney Sun, divorced woman's complaint. Stating that she'd been denied reasonable access to a 6-year-old child, Mrs. Clarice Kathleen Leard alleged in the divorce court before Justice Boyce today
that an order of the court had been flouted. Charles Herbert Lead had been granted a decree on the ground of his wife's misconduct with Albert Huxley. Lead was given custody of the child, Ronald, but the court ordered that the mother should have reasonable access. In an affidavit, Mrs. Lead said that the court had directed that she should have access every Saturday between 9 and 6 p.m, but the son should not be taken into the presence of the co-respondent. She called for the child at the Redfern address on 2 Saturdays, but was not allowed to take the boy away. Lead, in an affidavit, stated that the boy had told him that he would not go to his mother when she called. The judge ordered that each Saturday the boy should be taken to the office of Owen Jones and Company, city agents for E.A. Hancock of Hurstville, who appeared for the applicant. The mother was to return him to his place of residence before 6 p.m, and he was not to be taken into the presence of the co-respondent. She claimed that Lead's father refused to allow her to take the child. On the 30th of October, she went to Lead's place and saw a conversation with Lead Sr., and she saw her child in the hall. The child called out to her, "I'm not going with you. You get drunk and start a fight." Lead Sr. in an affidavit said the child was unwilling to go with its mother. Justice Boyce said, "I'm sure that a boy 6 years of age can't make up his own mind. He should be made to obey the order of access. It is unthinkable that a child of his age could take up the attitude he has done towards his mother." Albert married Clarice in Wollongong in 1938. Interestingly, 2 marriage certificates were issued, one for Clarice Mabry and one for Clarice Lead. Albert married under his true surname of Farlow. And Albert died on the 12th of September 1941 in Lithgow, New South Wales. Mr. Albert Austin Farlow died in Lithgow Hospital early Friday morning, aged 31. He was an employee of the small arms factory. The late Mr. Farlow was born at Dubbo and lived at Wollongong for 5 years before taking up work at Lithgow 6 months ago as a filer in the Brengun section. He suffered from a heart affliction, and as the long journey from Katoomba, where he was living with his wife and child, was injuring his health, he obtained board and residence in Bank Street. The late Mr. Farlow was very popular amongst his workmates at the SAF. His workmates were his pallbearers. Amongst the wreaths were 2 of the permanent type from the Arms, Explosives and Munition Workers Federation, and the other from the press room at the SAF. So I hope you enjoy the interesting story of Herbert Farlow and his misdemeanours and what happened to his children.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.